Go. All right, I think we're live here, Minnie. Sunday morning, bright and early, with Minnie the Body Shop Girl. What's up?
Just getting ready to do a little priming, I think.
Yeah, you got it. Priming, not sealing.
Priming.
We're not going to seal, we're going to prime. So what we got here is a Mustang. And basically, look at this here. Look.
Mustang.
Look at all that Bondo dust.
That's not even half of it.
That's not even half of it. But everybody, I want you to look at this body work here. Most people look at it and they say, God, look at all that Bondo. That's a lot of Bondo. I can't believe he used all that Bondo. Well, that's not a lot of Bondo. That's like a skim coat of Bondo because there's all the Bondo right there. All right? It takes a very, very long time to learn how to do Bondo the proper way. Before we go any further, what we're doing, we're working on a 1966 Mustang. The owner has owned this car for 40 years probably, and he started actually restoring this car 40 years ago. He only drove this car once, and then he pulled it in his garage to restore it, and it's been sitting in there ever since. Open the door up. Let's get a good look at the inside of this. It's immaculate. You won't believe this. I want everybody to look at this car. This is the original interior of this vehicle. The original interior. Look at the door panel. It's just kind of dirty right now.
Dusty.
Okay, we got a guy that says, greetings from Holland. I think it said Holland. Okay. But anyway, this car, 1966, this thing is like mint, flawless condition. He claims he's going to put brand new carpet in it. I don't know why. But this is one of the cleanest Mustangs I have ever seen since I was a kid when I first started doing all this. This is just, it's even got the factory original air conditioning and everything works on it. So what we've done to this car, show them how easy that door shuts.
Oh.
Look at that. Watch, do it again. Do you see that there? That is a really, really nice car. This is a clean car. You're right, Rafael Hernandez. But what we're doing here is we're finishing up this guy's 40-year restoration for him. He's actually, how old is Leon? Like 83 or something?
I don't know, but he's up there.
He's 83 years old. We're going to get some pictures of him with it, post them up on Facebook. Very nice guy. And his goal in life is actually for him and his sister, I think his sister's 2 or 3 years older than him, to drive this car. So we're going to make his dream come true. We've been busting our ass and working very, very hard to get this done for old Leon. And you can see that the engine compartment has been completely painted inside and out. We've done that. We removed the body panels on the vehicle. We'll paint those inside and out. I want to show everybody what kind of work I'm doing over here to this car for Leon. You can see all this is brand new, immaculate condition. Let's get a good look underneath the car. I had the bottom of it sandblasted, and you can see that even underneath the car is like brand spanking new. So, yeah, very, very clean car. Now, this little video is about, because, you know, these live videos, you really can't show people how to do stuff. You can, but they're basically vlogs. And you're basically like talking about stuff and kind of giving them tech tips, and that's what this is going to be about. I'm not really going to show you how to do anything, but I am going to teach you something about how to do something, believe it or not. Was that funny? Yeah. When you hold the camera here, our microphone's over here, so don't hold your hand like that, because then it's... This is actually an iPhone 6 Plus, supposed to be a high-tech phone, but... So what we're doing here is we're working on our 66 Mustang, and now I want you to take a good look at this. I had this car completely soda blasted. This car was soda blasted down to bare metal, and what this is about, a lot of people ask me a lot of questions about epoxy primer versus primer. And that's basically what we're going to go over today, is when should I use epoxy primer, how should I use epoxy primer, and what is basically epoxy primer used for. So I'm going to give the camera to Minnie. She's actually here with us today, and she loves being the camera girl because she gets to talk to everybody. So if you got questions or you want to say hi, Minnie's the girl that's going to talk back at you. All right? Don't cover the microphone
Don't
up.
cover the microphone
so-
up. Hello, everybody. Shit.
You're not supposed to drop the phone.
I dropped the phone. Sorry.
What
Oops.
happened?
I don't know. I think I did anything. It just came unplugged, I think.
Right there. Okay. Minnie dropped my phone. Okay?
Oops, good
You know
thing
if this phone breaks, you know what happens.
Good thing it's in a.
You know if
good
this phone
I
breaks,
know you go buy another.
I get to go buy a brand new one,
Yeah,
so
I know.
don't drop it. Lucky I got a Pelican case.
Lucky, thank God. Hey,
All right.
Antonio, Rolf, Mr. Guy, jeez.
Okay.
Oh, this says it's on mute.
What are you doing here?
Okay, never mind.
Turn it up
Okay,
all the way.
it is hello from Carrollton, also working today.
Okay.
Alpha Ghost, hey, go.
We'll let Minnie go ahead and talk to some people. She likes talking to everybody.
Hey, Daryl.
Okay, come on over here. So, what we're looking at here, we're looking at this Mustang. Now, what you're looking at here, this is not primer. What we're looking at, are we backlit?
A little
All
bit.
right, let's go over here. What we're looking at here, this is Epoxy Sealer. Okay?
Sealer, guys.
This
Sealer.
is not a primer. Now, when I had this car soda blasted, I wanted to seal the car up because I wasn't going to work on it immediately right away. So what I did is I got me a high quality PPG brand epoxy primer, and I put 2 coats of epoxy primer on this. Now what that did, that sealed my metal up for me, so I can actually just take my time on it and work on it when I want to. But if we look at this car over here, this is our Honda. All right, now I stripped this one down to bare metal. I want you to look at that. You can see where the surface rust is coming through. This has been in metal for a very long, well, I guess since what, January or?
It's been in metal since it was made, I'm
Well,
pretty sure.
bare metal. I think this car's been in bare metal since probably January or so.
Yeah, it's been
This
for a
was
while.
a major restoration job. Now, what I got to do to this is I got to go back and look right here what I do. I take a pencil after I prime the car. I use my light in my shop and I find the imperfections and then I'll circle everything. And you can see up here, we did some major restoration on this roof. We got, other dents that we got to repair on it. So this car here stayed in bare metal all the time, and I didn't put any epoxy primer on it because I worked on it continuously.
Right.
So when you're working on it continuously, there's really no sense to put it in an epoxy primer because you're working on it on a daily basis. But once I got done with this, I went ahead and put my 2K primer on this car so I could block it out. Now I still got to go back, and here's an imperfection here, and then there's one right here. And a lot of this will come out when I block sand, but a lot of this that you're looking at is from the bodywork being too high. All right, so this is going to be our first block sand on this car to paint it.
Hey, Poland.
But on this particular car over here, I already knew that it needed bodywork, but it didn't need a lot of bodywork.
We used Pepsi. Somebody's just being funny. Hey, Holland.
All right. I knew that this had bodywork, but if you look real close, like I said, this is a 2-owner car. It's been in this guy's garage for 40 years, and you can see all it's got is little dings on it. So I didn't use 2K primer on this. I just put a sealer on it. Now, when you're talking epoxy primer, it is not a primer. It is a sealer. That means all it's used for is to seal up the metal or seal up the bare bodywork or whatever you're working on so you can put paint on it.
Hey, Germany.
And
Hello.
in this case, what we did is we used our epoxy sealer primer to seal up the bare metal until we can work on it. Now, if you look right here, you can see that we got the bare metal here, and then it goes straight into epoxy primer. Now, this is the situation you have with epoxy primer. If you take the primer and think, I'm going to prime my car with epoxy primer, because that's a sealer and a primer one, that's not how it works. Because you still got to wet sand this, you still got to prep it up for paint. You cannot just epoxy prime it and paint it, so you got to sand it. Am I right?
Yep, absolutely.
So when you take your sander, and I'm going to show you what happens when you just use epoxy primer and not 2K primer. I'm going to show you on that car. We're going to use these two as an example. Epoxy primer is a sealer. I've said that a million times, but I always get emails and phone calls and all this, and I'm hoping I can clear this up. But if you look right here on this sandpaper, look at that.
It's gummed up.
That is gummed up. Now I want to show you, I'm going to sand a spot of this epoxy primer, and I want to show you what it does. You see how it's removing the epoxy primer? But look what it's doing.
Gumming up the paper.
Okay, epoxy primer is a non-sandable primer.
And that is why it's gumming up,
It's
because
a
you're not
non-sandable
supposed
primer
to sand.
because it is a sealer. It's designed to seal the metal. Now, before I did any of this body work, that's another question people are asking, is can you put Bondo or body filler on top of epoxy primer? No, you can't. You still have to break the primer down to bare metal to put the bodywork on. So everywhere that you see over here, I'm down here now, okay?
I
grinded it down. You can see right here. Here's a good example.
Does epoxy have isocyanide acid stuff in it? You know that?
No, this is not a self-etching primer.
Okay.
Now, isocyanide and acid are two different things. Isocyanide is a chemical that's used in acrylic enamel paint as a hardener. Now the acid, I don't know, I think that's what the guy's asking, is it a self-etching primer? No, this is not a self-etching primer. All right, this is not a chromo-based primer. A self-etching primer actually has an acid additive like the guy just said, and when you spray it on there, it etches itself. Now that primer is usually they design that from aluminum, for airplanes and aluminum body cars and stuff like that. You can use it on a metal car, but it's really not necessary, and you're wasting your time when you use a self-etch primer on a car like this. So, back to the story. So you see, by using the epoxy primer, and another thing I want to show you is I actually put 2 thick full wet coats on this, and I want to show you when I sand that with my sander one more time. I want me to get a good look at that. This is 2 full wet coats of epoxy primer. And just from sanding it those few seconds, look what happened.
It's already down to the bare metal.
It's already down to bare metal. Now, we're going to go over, I'm going to go ahead and change my paper out. And we're going to go over to Randy Honda's car over here, Mr. California guy.
Hello, Moon.
And then, where's my 80 grit? I'll be right back. I got to go get a piece of 80 grit. I'll be right back. Minnie Body Shop Girl will do some talking. She hasn't been here in about a month. So.
Chemistry 101 by Pete. Hey, Oklahoma. Juan, see you, thank you. What's up? Not a whole lot. It's early Sunday morning. The weather's beautiful, and we're at work. Well, we can't drive the Mustang to Moab because there's no engine in it, for one thing. Hey, Greece, I would love to come there someday. Canada, how y'all doing up there?
Okay.
Aussie,
I went and got a brand new piece on my block. Now this is another thing another tech tip here is you want to use a very good hand block when you start block sanding your car. And these are very good kits. If you catch the name of that, I don't like to advertise, but if you can catch that, that's the best brand out there.
I'm the boss, Patriot. I'm the boss.
Okay, back over here.
Axel's in the office with Baxter. Okay,
so back to the priming. Now, this is 2K primer. This has got 2 full wet coats of primer on it versus our epoxy. So I'm going to take the blocks, and you can see that's brand new. This is 80 grit. And then when I sand that, I'm only going to sand it for about the same amount of time. Look what's going on here. Okay. You can see the dust building up on it. Am I right?
Uh-huh.
And I'm still sanding it. And then when we look at the paper, look.
No gumming up on the paper.
Do you see that? And I got a nice sand job going. And what I've done is I found my high spots. Wherever metal showed, that's a high spot. That means there's low spots in this area. And I have to go back and do my body work.
There you go.
But you got to understand now, we're using 80 grit.
This is 2K primer?
This is 2K primer. This is a primer. It's called a filler primer.
Is it a high build primer?
It's a high build primer. But I know that I have to go back and block sand this whole car out because of the major work I did on it. So I only put 2 coats. I usually put 3, but there's only 2 on here because I'm going to reprime it again.
Hey, Virginia.
So you saw what happened when we used 80 grit, which is a very coarse sandpaper. The coarser the sandpaper, the less it's going to gum up. So let's say that we were going to epoxy prime this right here.
Is 2K epoxy primer, filler primer good?
Yes, it's the best you can use.
Okay.
So now we're going to go ahead and use a piece of 180. The finer the sandpaper, the more it's going to gum up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because you're not ripping into the primer. So we're going to go ahead and sand the same spot here using 180. Now watch what happens. And you can see that it looks like it's sanding, but look at the buildup on that.
It's not really sanding, it's just gumming up the
It's
paper.
gumming the paper up, and the more you sand, what happens,
It
Minnie?
makes little grooves and
Okay,
ridges.
see that right
in
there?
it.
That will make a gouge everywhere that you sand. I want you to look at this. All right, from it grinding up, look at, and then here's a piece of dust here. Didn't even sand that out. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so this is a sealer. Now another thing that epoxy sealer primer is used for is right before you paint your car, when you got it already prepped up, it's in the paint booth, it's taped off, is let's say that I wet sanded my car, and watch the edge right here. Okay, so I'm using this as an example with 2K primer. So let's say that the car's taped off and I come across this where I was wet sanding it and I went through the edge.
Went all the way down through to the bare metal.
Right. What you would do is you would spot prime that using epoxy primer.
Which is your non-sanding
Non-sandable
sealer.
primer. And that would be, if you look right here, don't look at me. All right, let's say that I wet sanded this and this area is ready to paint, but I went through the metal. Instead of repriming that and then have to resand that, we would come back and we would take our spray gun and we would blend a little shot of epoxy primer in there as a sealer, so when we paint our car, it doesn't blister up around these edges.
And you do that to all the bare metal spots when you get ready to paint the car, right?
I go around the car, and that's right before you paint it. So that's 2 things that epoxy primer is used for. It's used for sealing a metal car, such as this, if you can back up a little bit, where we stripped it down to metal, and we wanted to seal it to protect it, or if it's in your paint booth, you bring it back over here, and it's ready for paint, and we have a bunch of this going on.
Because you do not want to get a reaction in your paint when you're painting.
Now, this is something good with 2K primer that you can use if you come over here.
Yes, Pete has used an airbrush. Hey, Sweden.
Well, okay, I'm going to clear that up about the airbrush. I think he's asking if I use an airbrush for the epoxy primer.
Oh.
No, we wouldn't do that. What we would do, though, is you can use a touch-up spray gun, one of the little small touch-up spray guns. Using an airbrush, the primer's too thick, and coming out of an airbrush hole would actually splatter it on there and not spray it. So, no, we're not using an airbrush on that. What you would use is either your regular spray gun, and then you adjust it down to where it's a small pattern, or you would use a touch-up gun, which is a small version of a spray gun, and then you'd go back and
get your spots.
Right. Now, another thing that I want to tell you about 2K primers, you can actually use that as a sealer. And the way that you use that as a sealer is you mix up your 2K primer the way that you mix it up, like it says on the can, but you add 10 to 25% reducer in it. What that'll do, that'll thin it out. That'll thin it out where when you spray it, it'll flow out real smooth. All right, now it's still a sandable primer, but if you don't have any epoxy primer when you're going to paint your car, like, let's say that we sanded through right here where I sanded through, and I need to cover that up, I can take my 2K primer, which is a filler primer like everybody was asking, add 10 to 20% reducer, not lacquer thinner. I've seen people use lacquer thinner, and that will screw your paint job up. If you use the reducer, that will thin your reducer down, and then you can spray that on there, just spot spray it, and it'll be the same thing as using a sealer, and you don't sand it. But if it screws up, you can come back and sand it. Now, you're probably asking me, why don't I use the regular...
Oh, shit. That scared the hell out of me, Pete.
Watch out, Randy's got an alarm on this from California. Okay, a lot of people are asking me, probably saying, well, why don't you just use the 2K primer on everything and then don't even use the epoxy primer?
Because it's really expensive?
Because the 2K primer is a lot more expensive to use, and I wouldn't want to prime my whole car and then come back and, do you see what I'm saying? And an epoxy sealer is always a better base on doing a job like this than it would be doing that, because I would have to block sand the whole car out versus, I'd have to block sand the whole car out, liberally, like instead of doing it this way.
Okay, why is it bad to use thinner to thin it out?
Because lacquer thinner because you don't want to mix a lacquer product with a urethane product.
Ah.
Now, if you're using lacquer primer, that's fine. Use the lacquer reducer, the lacquer thinner. But you don't want to use a lacquer product with a urethane, okay? 2K primer is a urethane product. Everything that you use today is 90% urethane. So you want to use reducers. There's a difference between reducer and thinner. All right?
There you go.
So we used our sealer. Now, what we're going to do before we prime this car, because I'm going to put 3 full wet coats of 2K primer on this so we can wet sand this out. Another thing is you can't wet sand, even if you think to yourself, well, I can wet sand it. No, you can't.
So you use epoxy primer on the bare metal and then go over it with the 2K.
After you dry sand it with 180. Now when you dry sand this with 180, all you're doing is scuffing it down just like I'm doing here. That's it. Okay? I'm not even putting any pressure on it, because if I put pressure on it, what's going to happen? Minnie? It's going to gum up.
Yes.
Okay? Now, I'm going to go like this, okay? And look what's happening. I'm already starting to gum up. All right? You see, even when you tap on it and get it off, you're still going to have those little things there. But what I'm doing is I'm roughing up that epoxy primer so I can apply my 2 to 3 full wet coats of regular primer so I can wet sand it out. Because even if you wet sand this epoxy primer, it's going to gum up the wet sandpaper worse than it will the dry.
Going live. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Our phone rang.
How long can it sit in epoxy primer?
I'm not sure.
Okay, we think we got a question. How long can your car sit in epoxy primer? Your car can sit in epoxy primer for years. Let me show you this here. Okay?
Can I use a 1.8 millimeter nozzle spray gun for thinner? Okay, guys, sometimes these questions go by so fast I can't read them all.
Okay.
Pete,
a 1.8 nozzle is for primers.
Is for primers. Okay, there you go.
It's not really for paint. 1.4, 1.3, 1.2, and all that, yeah. 1.5. 1.8 is designed for primers. This primer that you're looking at right here, I want to answer that guy's question. This is brown primer. This is regular. This is from the 80s. This is primer that was from the late 70s or 80s. So I'm considering that this is probably lacquer primer. You can see where, look how quick it's sanding through. Okay? And that primer has been on this car since then. So yes, you can put your car in epoxy primer, and this is what I try to tell everybody, is if you're not going to work on it continuously like I've been doing on the Honda, you need to put at least 1 to 2 coats of epoxy primer on it so it won't surface rust
Just
from the
protect.
moisture. Protect it. All right? That doesn't mean you have to go back and strip it back down. Like I said, you take your 180 dry,
Scuff
and
it.
you just scuff it like I'm doing here.
And put your,
Okay, just like that.
and then put your
And then
primer
this
on top
surface
of
is
it.
now ready. You don't have to sand this down or wet sand it down to 400 or anything like that. All right, this roof is now ready to put our 2K primer on. And you can see, look what's happening here. See these, if I push too hard, look at the scratches. All right, so you really got to know how to sand this epoxy primer or you're going to ruin your car. But anyway, that's just a short video that I wanted to share with you on epoxy primer and 2K primer because I had an epoxy here and a 2K over there.
Yes, he should be wearing breathing apparatus, but for the
Videos,
but
we don't.
so
And
he
you
can
show them right there. There's our breathing.
But he can't talk very well with that on, so you know.
Now, I always wear safety equipment with everything I do. So I was supposed to have my safety glasses.
They were on your
didn't give it
head,
to
I
me.
think. I don't know.
Okay, this is Pete and Minnie the Body Shop Girl. We're working on Sunday.
Oh, is there a difference on what color primer you use?
Okay, if you're going to paint your car white, you definitely don't want to use black primer. All right, if you're going to paint your car black, you can use gray or black primer. All right, if you're going to paint it white, you can use a white epoxy primer. Another thing about epoxy primer, I want to tell you, you can actually tint that primer. So let's say that you're doing a bright orange paint job, that House of Color orange, I don't even know what it's called. And you want it to really pop, but you don't want to spend millions of dollars on 6 gallons of paint because House of Color paint, to me, is cheap. It's kind of like water, and you got to put 30 coats of it on to make it work. But that's another day and another story. So what you can do is you can get some white epoxy primer, and then you can get some orange tint, and you can tint that primer to an orange epoxy primer, and then prime your whole car with one coat of that, and don't sand it, don't touch it, and then immediately apply your paint on top of that. That's going to save you a lot of money and a lot of time. I got a video set coming up where we actually tinted on the 66 Chevelle. So we need to get to work. I hope I answered all your questions. A lot of people are very confused about epoxy primer because it has the word primer in there. It is not a primer, it is a sealer. I don't know why they call it primer.
Check the label if it says non-sanding primer.
Well, I don't even know if it says that.
Oh, does it say that?
I don't even know.
Oh, I figured it would say that.
It might say that, it might not. All right. But I'm telling you now that epoxy primer is not a primer. I cannot prime this. Look here. I cannot prime this Bondo spot here with epoxy primer and then paint. The primer will saturate right into that Bondo. It won't even cover it. You'll see a big spot right here. Okay?
Hi, New Brunswick.
This is Pete. I got to go. Minnie is talking too much. And
I barely
we'll
talked
see y'all
at all.
later. And hopefully, if you're not working on Sunday, you're actually doing something exciting and fun and enjoying your day.
Do you prefer self-etching or epoxy on rust restoration?
On a rust restoration.
I'm not sure what he means
Okay.
by that.
If you're working on a car that has extensive rust, you're going to have to fix all that rust and get rid of that rust one way or the other before you put any primer on it. If you remove the rust properly, I still use epoxy primer. All right? I very rarely
Happy
ever
Thanksgiving
use.
in Canada.
The only time that I ever use self-etching primer is if it's an aluminum product or if I am painting some chrome hubcaps.
We don't watch the NFL here.
Yeah. Okay, we got to go. Take it easy, and I hope this helped you out. Epoxy primer is a sealer. It is not a primer. 2K primer is what you want to use after you do all your body work, and that's the filler primer. All right? Epoxy primer is a sealer only. You can put 3 full wet coats of that on there, and it'll sand right through, but it's going to gum your paper up, and it's it goes on very thin. We got to go. I got a lot of work to do, and today's Sunday. We'll see you later. Take it easy.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
All right. How do you stop? There we go. Okay.